United States. This is surpassing, many of the other insect problems you can see in trees. You've heard about mountain pine beetle wiping out lots of pines in the west. There's hemlock woolly adelgid in the east on hemlocks. Those are all minor in comparison to the economic impact that emerald ash borer is having in North America. It's affecting ash in urban areas. Ash were considered very valuable trees. They were heavily planted after all the elms died from Dutch elm disease. Everybody started planting ash. And so there's a lot of ash in our urban environments. There's native ash. There's 16 species of native ash in North America. All of them are susceptible to emerald ash borer. So you can see in the pictures there some of the urban trees that have completely died, and then some of the native stands with ash in them are also being wiped out in areas where emerald ash borer has become established. Just sort of the background, emerald ash borer is not native to the United States. It's from Asia. It occurs naturally, natively in Japan, China, some of the East Asian countries. And there, it doesn't really cause much damage on the Asian ash species there. It's an insect that has co-evolved with the Asian ash species, and they kind of have worked out a system where they kind of get along with each other without, the emerald ash borer killing the ash trees. But when the insect was brought over to the United States, our native ash trees did not have that evolutionary history with the insect. And so the genetics of our American trees can't handle emerald ash borer, and so they're very susceptible. And it is thought that it came to the United States in woodpacking material, pallets or something. We get a lot of shipment of things from China. And this being an insect that tunnels into the wood, can easily then be moved over in wood materials. So it came over, it was first discovered in Detroit, or near Detroit, in 2002. And so you can kind of see a little area where they tried, where they were finding it infested in counties, and then they were trying to quarantine the surrounding counties. And obviously that didn't work very well. So that was 2002. This map is 2018, and you can see all the highlighted states where they have found infestations of emerald ash borer. So it very quickly was discovered in many more locations. It's a difficult insect to detect early, so there probably had been many infestations already there for many years. But it's also an insect that can move long distances from an infested area to hundreds of miles away. The adults can fly, but not very far, maybe a few miles. It's because the larval stage, the borer, is carried about in firewood is kind of the main transport mechanism for emerald ash borer. So that's why it shows up, hundreds of miles away from that initial infested area of the country. So we in Nebraska are kind of keeping track of the counties where we find infestations. And so currently, as of March of 2024, we know that we have infestations in 13 counties. And most of them in the east. Here in North Platte, it was last July, I believe, is when it was discovered in Memorial Park. I think I might have a picture of that. Yep, there it is. So, and this is one of the declining ash trees in Memorial Park. How many people have been to Memorial Park and seen some of the trees there that are declining? When I drove by on the way here this evening, I drove by the park and I saw some ribbons tied around some trees. Are those ready to be removed?
They're removed, or they're just identified as ash trees.
As ash trees, yeah.
They look like this.
Yep, yep. So it's interesting because some of the ash trees look pretty bad. Some of them in the park still look pretty good. But very likely they all have some level of infestation in them. So at some point, those trees are all going to die. I'm assuming you're just going to be removing trees and not trees. So when the population of emerald ash borer builds up and you get a lot of insects out there, you get very rapid mortality of trees. So this is a picture of some ash trees. This happens to be in Ohio. And then the same street, 3 years later, the trees are just, they're all dead. And it's during that, I call it exponential phase of ash death. Okay, there's kind of in the beginning, in the graph, you see that on that's the left side, the mortality, the number of dead trees early in the infestation is very, very low because the population was very low. It's building up very slowly, and it takes several years before you start seeing a lot of mortality. So here in North Platte, we're kind of in that early phase, first few years. It's been here, I don't know how many years, but we're not seeing a lot of mortality yet. But in a few years, those populations of emerald ash borer are going to build up, and then that's where you get that sharp increase then in mortality in trees. And we'll probably see a lot of mortality in our ash trees probably in about 4 or 5 years from now. So that's kind of your time frame to be thinking about, what am I going to do with my trees? If you wait until there's a whole lot of dead ash trees in the entire community, you might have trouble finding, an arborist to come and take down your dead ash tree. Or it might be very expensive to do it because there's just such a demand for, tree workers. So now is the time. Think about what you're going to want to do with your trees. Just a little biology. Emerald ash borer. I sometimes call it EAB for short. So if I say EAB, it's emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer, the adult is this shiny metallic green beetle. It's kind of an elongate beetle. What did I do with those? Maybe come up here. Nope. Where's those?
They're right here.
Over here. I think there's probably some over there. I'll just pass it. Yeah, you can pass that around. There's some adult beetles in there. They're just about a 1/2 inch long, bullet shaped, and they feed on ash leaves, but they don't really that doesn't cause much damage at all. Just very minor feeding. It's that immature stage that causes the damage. The adults will lay eggs on the bark of ash trees, and then the larvae will hatch out of those eggs and they'll start feeding, and they tunnel underneath the bark, and they start making these little winding tunnels right underneath the bark. And the larvae will grow and get bigger and bigger, and feed more and more and make more and more tunnels for 1 to 2 years. Mostly 1 year. If you got a vigorous tree, it might take the insects 2 years to mature, but generally sometime in that time frame. And that's your destructive stage, because right underneath the bark is very important tissues for the tree. The tissues that carry water up the trunk, nutrients up the trunk, they carry sugars right underneath the bark. So when the insect is damaging that tissue, it's really damaging for the tree. So the symptoms you're going to see in the tree are going to be a lot of dieback, very thin crowns. The trees just aren't going to look good because of that larval feeding. And then the larvae will eventually mature and become the adults. And those adult beetles then are going to come out of that wood, and they'll come out through little D-shaped exit holes, very tiny D-shaped exit holes. And I have some examples of exit holes that here on the table that you can take a look at. Very tiny, like a little capital letter D. Now, are you gonna see this on your tree? Probably not, because it's gonna start up very high in the tree. And it will take years before finally you start to see more feeding down in the trunk. And by the time you're seeing a lot of feeding down in the trunk, your tree's probably already dead. So I don't expect that you will probably see these little D-shaped holes, but you will see other holes in ash trees as well. Now, what you will see in your ash tree is you might see woodpecker activity. The woodpeckers are going after those larvae, stripping the bark off, and you'll see kind of that blonding, they call it blonding, on the trunk, where they strip the outer bark off and reveal the inner bark. And you might get these little jagged holes where the woodpeckers have pulled the larvae out of there. So there's your larvae, there's your woodpeckers. So that you might see in your tree, and that's a little more noticeable. Okay. Other borers in ash. So emerald ash borer, there's your tiny little D-shaped holes, about 1/8 of an inch, very small. One of the more common borers that are native here and attack our ash trees is the lilac ash borer, or the lilac borer, sometimes called lilac borer. It attacks lilacs. Lilacs are related to ash trees, so it also attacks ash trees. And their little exit holes are going to generally be round and a little bit bigger. So you're going to see that on ash trees. This is not a real aggressive pest, so our trees are adapted to a little bit better to dealing with this insect, especially once the trees get bigger. Younger trees can be pretty well damaged by this, but older trees handle this insect a little better. Flat-headed apple tree borer. This is another common borer that will get into ash trees. The exit holes, you're going to see exit holes made by it. They're going to be kind of oval in shape, a little bit bigger. Okay, you're going to see that in trees that are under stress with our native borers in them. Red-headed ash borer, banded ash borer. Again, these are native borers that will get into ash trees. Generally round, little tiny round exit holes are made by these insects. Carpenter worm. This is another borer, common borer that gets into ash. It's the adult stage is a moth, very large moth. The larval stage is a very large caterpillar, and it makes very large exit holes. Okay, so again, this is something you might see in ash trees that are still growing. They're struggling along, but they're still managing with these borers, these native borers in them. Now, if you're seeing that, that's going to tell you that your tree is probably stressed, because borers tend to go after, they're attracted to trees that are under stress. So that gives you a clue that, well, my tree is pretty stressed because I'm seeing some activity of these other borers in it. And that also means that that tree is going to be attracted to emerald ash borer as well. So that's just something to be looking at as you look at your trees. Emerald ash borer. Host is ash trees. We have green ash here, we have white ash. Those are our most common native ash trees. There's various cultivars that have been released. Marshall seedless is a common one. Autumn purple ash is one of the common white ashes. Ash trees were very popular once all the elm trees started dying. So that's what people were putting in. And they're very susceptible now to this emerald ash borer. There is a tree known as the mountain ash. This is not a true ash tree, okay? It's not going to be attacked by emerald ash borer. So if you have a mountain ash, you don't have to worry about emerald ash borer and mountain ash. Mountain ash is actually related to like crab apples. I mean, look at the fruit on that. It's kind of like little crab apples or little hawthorn berries. And so, but it has leaves that are kind of similar to ash leaves. That's why they call it mountain ash. So just pointing that out. Does anybody have a mountain ash? You know, if you have a mountain ash, you can leave. Okay. All right. Okay, let's get to treatments. There are a lot of different treatments that are out there. Professional and homeowner treatments. What we recommend is for you to, if you want to do the treatments yourself, it's probably best if you are doing it on smaller trees, because what's available to homeowners is going to be most effective on the smaller trees. So you could go and measure your tree, the circumference around the tree, and anything up to about 45 inches around circumference, or 15 inches in diameter. It's roughly the size of the tree, or smaller. Then that's something that you could potentially treat yourself. Generally, what's available are soil treatments. Larger trees, it's probably better to go with a professional arborist and the methods that they have. So the common homeowner treatment for some of these smaller trees are the soil applications. You can buy chemical, the active ingredients in imidacloprid or dinotefuran. You can buy these in generally garden centers. And you basically just mix it up and pour a solution right around the base of the tree. And the root system will soak up that chemical, carry it up through the tree, and distribute it throughout the tree. Now, it can be difficult for larger trees to get good distribution of that chemical. So that's why it's generally better to use soil treatments on smaller trees. This is kind of about the time to be thinking about putting down those soil treatments. Imidacloprid generally is in April. It takes a little longer for the trees to pick it up. If it's dinotefuran, which is the active ingredient, that one's picked up a little faster, so you can wait till May. But basically, it's when the leaves are starting to come out, which will help drive that water movement up the tree. So, did you have a question?
How long does that stuff last when you apply it?
These are going to be 1-year treatments. Yeah. So then you got to apply every year for protecting the trees. Yes.
I'm struggling with putting that right next to the stump or the trunk. The majority of the roots are 5 to 10 feet away from the trunk.
Actually, there's a lot of roots.
Still a lot of there.
There's a lot of roots very close to the trunk, and we're trying to get as much of that chemical picked up by the tree and not by the lawn or other plants. There are, so 1 application per year, as I mentioned. The cost somewhere around $50 a year for a 15-inch diameter tree, give or take. Some thoughts to keep in mind, like I mentioned, if you got very large trees, the larger the tree, more likely you're going to have uneven distribution through the canopy. These chemicals are toxic to a lot of other insects, especially honeybees. Any flowering plants underneath the ash tree are going to pick up that soil chemical and carry it into the nectar and the pollen. So you got to think about those kinds of things. If you have linden trees growing near your ash trees, lindens are big honeybee trees, and their root systems are going to pick up that same chemical out of the soil. So those are things to think about. Just the effects of these chemicals on, the non-target organisms. And then if you're applying, these same chemicals are used for grub control in lawns. So if you are doing grub control, there's certain limits to how much chemical can be applied. So you may not be able to apply both drug control and treatment for your trees at the same time, because then you'd be over applicating with the chemical. So again, those are just things to kind of keep in mind if you're going to be looking at soil applications. Professional treatments. So there are soil applications that professionals can use. Same active ingredients. There's also systemic bark sprays. So they can actually spray the trunk of trees, and it's absorbed through the trunk, through the bark, and carried up. And that generally works for somewhat smaller trees. Some of the research that has been done has shown it to work on trees up to about 22 inches in diameter. Okay, what's 22 inches? Almost 2 feet in diameter. And it's fairly easy to apply. But again, it's environmental exposure. So it's you're spraying it out there on the bark of the tree, and so potentially other insects that might land on it could be exposed to it. Trunk injections and implants then are another option, and these are the injection methods are available to professionals. There are professional arborists that will be trained into using these injection methods. Most of the injection methods require that you use a drill and you drill holes in the trunk all around the tree, and then you inject a chemical into that trunk. I've got listed up there 3 different active ingredients. The middle one, emamectin benzoate, is the most effective, and that's what most of the arborists are using if they're doing trunk injections. And that's that middle list there. Triage, Boxer, Mectinite are some of the brand names that are being used in trunk injection methods using emamectin benzoate. There are also trunk implants. These are actually available to homeowners in garden centers. They contain the active ingredient acephate, and they're actually in a little capsule, and you drill holes into the trunk, all around the trunk. You tap these capsules into the trunk, and the chemical is actually dissolved and carried up to the tree, just like the trunk injections. I try to encourage homeowners to let the professionals do the trunk injections, because they say it's easy to apply. Well, it's easy to apply and make a lot of mistakes. So when you're trying to put these implants in, I mean, you look like you know what you're doing. Yep. But you can cause a lot of damage if it's not set in there properly. I prefer to have professionals who have been doing injections for many years. They're skilled at it. They hopefully know what they're doing, and will probably cause less damage to the tree, because these injection methods and implants will damage the tree no matter what. I'm just going to show you a few examples of the injection methods there. I guess I got this pointer. The arborists that do injections, they have their favorite methods. Okay, so each arborist probably has a favorite injection method and chemical company that they work with, and that's the one they're going to be using. So you may want to talk to different arborists to find out about the different methods that are out there. Here's just different chemical applications. Most of them are drilling holes. There's different sizes to the different methods. Some drill big holes, some make small holes. Here's your implant. You can see this little capsule is just kind of forced into a drilled hole all around the trunk. So that's just kind of, gives you an idea of what's out there for professionals.
Do
Yes.
do the professional methods have to be repeated every year?
So the trunk injections, if you're using the emamectin benzoate, the most effective, currently it's about every 2 years. Okay. The other chemicals, probably once a year. So that's a concern too, because every year that means you're drilling more new holes and injecting more chemical. And that's pretty tough on the trees. Okay. So we kind of talked about this. There's positives to trunk injections. You know, you're putting the chemical right inside the tree, so there's less environmental exposure. And only what's feeding on that tree is going to generally pick it up. It works better for larger trees than soil applications. The negatives, a lot of skill required in applying these properly. Okay. So it's good to get an arborist that knows what they're doing when it comes to injections. And trunk damage. So all trunk injections and implants cause damage because of the holes in the trunk that are drilled in there, and from the chemical itself. The chemical itself will damage that interior tissue. And it's interior. So we don't see much damage just on the outside of the trunk. But looking inside some of these trunk injected trees, you can see there's a lot of internal damage in there. Okay. And so that affects the tree's ability to grow well. Yes, you're controlling the borer, but you know, there's negative to it too. So,
How does that affect,
yeah.
withstand wind?
Yeah, you know, smaller trees, especially that middle one, you would think that that's not a very, you know, structurally sound tree. And that's why generally it's best to do injections and implants on larger trees so that you have, you know, less damage locally. But yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of trees that have been killed because of injection done to them.
Lori,
Yeah.
wondering what are some of the worst causes of damage for injections? Is it like if they put it all on the same plane, you know, you want to spiral them up, I would think?
Yeah, that is, yeah, so some of the types of damage, and methods that can cause more damage with injections, it does relate to, you know, you can spiral it a little bit around the trunk to help a little bit with separating that chemical, that damage apart. And I'll talk about this in a little bit, but also, how much, how often you inject. So, if you're injecting once a year with some of those chemicals, yeah, that's very hard for the trees to recover from. So the longer time between injections, the more time for the trees to recover. If you're injecting into the same spots where you've already injected, well, then you don't get good distribution of the chemical. That tissue's not going to be conductive, and so the chemical isn't going to get distributed very well if you're hitting some of those same locations where you've already injected. So I'll just talk a little bit more. Basically, the point I'm trying to make is be very selective about the trees you want to treat, because you want trees that are in really good condition that can better handle those trunk injection treatments. So I kind of have I have a handout here that you can pick up, selecting trees for emerald ash borer treatments, that shows a lot of the same pictures that I'm going to show you here, but you can evaluate your trees and decide, is this a good candidate for treatment or not? So good candidates for treatment would be, of course, your high value trees. And probably many of you are here because you have a high value tree, right? You know, it's an important tree to you. It's shady. It's been in your family, on your property for years. High value to you. Is it in a good location? That's an important consideration for whether it should be treated. and is it in good condition? Is it pretty healthy? And healthy trees are ones that have a history of good care. And that good care would include, have you been watering the tree during droughty periods? Okay. Do you have a wood chip mulch around the trunk to help conserve some of that moisture and keep the lawnmowers away from damaging the trunk? You know, is that root zone been protected, or have you been driving your car over the root zone and compacting that soil and damaging the roots? Those kinds of things, if it's got a good history of care, it's probably going to be a healthier tree and a better candidate for injections. Okay. So poor candidates, here's some examples. You know, if you've got trees in a bad location, if they're, you know, butting up against the sidewalk and lifting the sidewalk, maybe decide to take that tree out. If it's growing under wires, probably take that tree out, right? These are kind of no-brainers. Look at the canopy. Does it look bad? Has it got a lot of dead branches in it? Is it very thin? Probably a stressed tree, probably not very healthy. It's not going to handle those trunk injection treatments very well. Might want to take that tree out. Look for mushrooms and decay honks up in the branches. That would suggest that you've got a lot of decay in those trees. Again, they're probably stressed. Other borers, we talked about the other borers that are in there. If you're seeing a lot of other borers are attracted to stressed trees. These are not going to be very healthy trees. Okay. Mower blight. Okay. That's where the injections are being made, in the trunk. And so if you've got damage down there because of the mowers and the string trimmers, that chemical is not going to be easily picked up and distributed to the tree. So those are kinds of trees that are not going to respond well to the treatments. Girdling roots. Trees that are planted too deep and their root system is way down in here. These are trees that are not able to pick up water as well, move nutrients through the stems, and they're going to be stressed. They're going to grow. I mean, obviously our trees struggle through at a lot of difficult conditions, such as girdling roots and trees that are too deep in the soil, and they grow, but they're stressed. And so adding more stress from trunk injections or implants might just kind of tip them over the edge. And just structural issues with the trees. You know, look for, like for example, in this tree on the right, you've got two major trunks. They're very tightly spaced. They're like a tight V. And that means, and you see that seam down the middle between them. In between that seam, you have bark against bark. So that is a weak union there, okay? It's a weak branch structure or crotch. And potentially under storm conditions or high winds, they can split apart. So structural issues, if there's a lot of branches coming out at one point on the trunk, again, you've got tree branches that are not strongly attached. The tree just may have some structural issues that probably would make it not a very good tree for treating. And the looks can be deceiving, okay? That tree looks like a really nice looking ash tree, but take a closer look, and it's kind of hard to see in this picture, but notice all those branches coming out from one point and how tightly they're all spaced with each other. That tree has got a lot of structural issues there. And in addition to, notice there's no root flare down there at the base. That tree is deep in the soil. It's planted too deep. Again, another stressful situation for the tree. Okay, so you can go out and look at your trees and give them an evaluation and see, is this going to be a tree that will be healthy enough to handle the treatments or not? So if you decide maybe it's a tree to go out, be removed, keep in mind, of course, tree removal is very dangerous work, especially these large trees. And if the trees get emerald ash borer and die from emerald ash borer, they become very brittle and very weak, and they're very much more dangerous than to work in. And there are a lot of arborists that will not climb into a tree, an ash tree that has died from emerald ash borer, because it's too dangerous for them to do that. So another reason why you don't want to delay and wait until your tree has died from emerald ash borer to have it removed, because that's going to make it much harder for the arborist to remove it. It'll be much more expensive. It'll be more dangerous. It could drop limbs on your house before you get it removed. So again, something to think about in the next few years, what you want to do with your ash tree. Winter's a good time for removals. A lot of the arborists it's kind of their downtime a little bit. Less busy, might be less expensive. The frozen ground protects the soil structure better, so you can have tree removal equipment out there, and it's not going to be out there impacting your soil. Like I said, consider having the ash removed just in the next few years. Otherwise, that ash mortality is going to, expand. Waiting lists, we kind of already talked about this. Like I said, the arborist will not climb declining or dead ash trees. And you may have dead trees in areas that you just can't get equipment to very easily. So,
So do you recommend using the wood for firewood, letting it set for, a year or two?
Yeah.
You cut it down, is that gonna?
firewood is, at one time, we were recommending that you don't use that firewood. You especially don't want to move that firewood. Okay, that's kind of what we're saying now. You can use the firewood, keep it local. Don't be spreading around the state, right? Don't give it to your cousin Eddie who doesn't have, it's got a fireplace in Idaho and he wants your ash tree. No, don't do that. So yeah, I would say utilize it if you can. Firewood's great. If it can be chipped up into mulch, it makes great, wood chip mulches for your gardens. Yeah, hiring an arborist. Look for a professional certified arborist. There's a couple of professional organizations for arborists, and the International Society of Arboriculture, there's a website you can go to and look for an arborist and see who might be in your area that is certified. The Nebraska Arborist Association also has a list of arborists. Either the arborist may be certified, which means they actually have taken an exam and passed an exam on tree care, and they have to get continuing education credits every year to keep their education up. Those are certified arborists. Some arborists are not certified, but they might still belong to these organizations. So that's a good clue that you might have, an arborist that knows something. We're going to see more arborists in these organizations in the eastern part of the state, obviously Omaha, in more populous areas. There may not be as many certified arborists here in North Platte, or they might not. They might have to travel longer distances to work in your trees. So if you can't find a certified arborist to do your tree work, at least look for somebody who's insured, maybe someone who's been around for many years. Do you have a license requirement for tree workers? Okay, some cities require tree workers to be licensed with the city, but you don't here in North Platte. So, but check for insurance. Make sure you're insured. They're insured, and just beware that there's going to be fly-by-night, tree care companies that show up, especially when we start getting a lot of dying trees. Okay, so just be aware of that as in the next few years. So talking about ash wood utilization. Yeah, you can make it firewood, you can make it into wood chips, but if it's a special tree, and you got to cut it down, it's just not probably one that you're going to want to treat. you can have some of that wood made into some nice little memento, you know, of your tree. There are a lot of carpenters that will use ash wood. Ash is great furniture wood. These are all some ash products that were made with ash trees. Wood turners will turn bowls or platters or vases using ash wood. So you could have, you know, a piece of your favorite tree right there made into a nice little bowl, you know, just for you to remember your tree by. There's a community, this is in, what, I don't remember, it's in Iowa, I don't remember which city, but they are actually having wood carvers, stump carving done on properties throughout the city who have ash trees that, you know, they're gonna do. So, you know, that's something that could be looked into. Or even just cut some little ash discs from the branches of your tree, you know, sand them up and let your kids or your grandkids make little Christmas ornaments out of them, or some little decorative thing, you know, just some nice little thing that you have to kind of remember your tree by, right? I am gonna suggest that if you want to look for somebody to do, you know, maybe some of this woodworking or whatever, talk to my coworker, Kim Slezak. She's a forest products specialist with the Nebraska Forest Service. And she could probably connect you up with some folks that might be willing to do some kind of little craft project or something, if you aren't able to do anything with your tree. So, okay. And then alternative trees to plant. So if you have to take your tree down, you may want to put something back in there. And we're trying to, you know, get some diversity in our urban landscapes. You know, now, you know, we planted elms, Dutch elm disease wiped them out. We planted all ash trees, now emerald ash borer is wiping them out. Everybody's planting maple trees now. Well, what's the next thing that's going to wipe out the maple trees? So what we're trying to do is get people to plant a lot of different kinds of things. So I tell people, look at your neighbor's tree and plant something else, right? Just let's get some diversity in there. So for North Platte, the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum has some suggestions for other trees, alternatives to ash that would do well here. Kentucky coffee tree is a nice tree, some nice yellow color. Ginkgos will work here. Oaks, a lot of oak trees will do well. They're pretty tough, and they will do well here in North Platte. Ohio buckeye is a nice tree that they're finding is doing pretty well actually in many areas of the state. Japanese tree lilac. So this is an actual lilac, but it's a tree form instead of a shrub form. And it's kind of a smaller tree, but that also will do well. Honey locust, Turkish filbert, lindens are good trees. So there's just a lot of options for replanting and putting another tree.
Do you have a print list of that available?
Oh, you know, that would have been a good thing to bring, wouldn't it? I would say go to the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum website and kind of explore what they have there. It's a really good.
I have one more question.
So yeah.
Talk to me about honeybees. So I have 4 ash trees in the front yard that I feed and water my neighbor's honeybees in my backyard. How would treating the ash trees, I mean, how far apart can they be?
Yeah.
Or am I better just taking out my trees? Because the bees are more important to me at this point.
Yeah. If are you thinking then to like a soil treatment?
Yeah, that's probably what I would.
Yeah, probably. As long as you're not having other flowering plants
Yeah, I don't.
around that tree, around those trees.
Evergreen shrubs are kind of close.
Okay.
Is about the closest.
Even weeds, dandelions, clover, you know, anything that bees might visit, that could also be picked up, you know, by their root systems. Yeah, now ash trees, they will produce pollen, and honeybees will collect that pollen sometimes. Most of the time, though, ash trees are just wind pollinated. But they've done some studies where they have found that honeybees will sometimes collect a little ash pollen. So it's potential that that chemical, whether it's a soil application or, you know, a trunk injection, could actually get into tree pollen as well. But yeah, it's all balance, you know, weighing the options, the good and the bad. What, you know, I kind of tend to think that for trees, which are very long-lived organisms, you can do treatments that are going to protect the trees from very serious problems, but maybe serious problems that are only temporary. Okay, so like when we had young ash trees, we often would treat them for lilac borer with the trunk spray, because if you don't, that can really damage the young trees. But after several years, they kind of outgrow that problem. They still get it, but they're not as badly affected by lilac borer when they're older. So you don't have to treat anymore. Emerald ash borer, you're going to have to treat for the life of the tree. Okay, and that's where I start to think, do I want to be constantly, you know, treating my tree? Well, you know, some people say, yeah, you know, a lot of people, they treat their lawn for grubs all the time, you know, or for weeds, you know. I'm not saying that's necessarily the best thing to do, but, you know, if you're going to spend all that time taking care of your lawn, what about your tree? You know, do you want to treat your tree and protect it? You know, I'm just trying to have you look at different aspects of treatments and decide, you know, what kind of impact they might have, and maybe you'd still want to go ahead and treat.
What's the history of the trees that were originally infected back east? Are any of those left at all? Are they still treating some trees back there?
So back east, I mean, if there are some trees that are being treated and that are still alive. A lot of trees that were treated died because I think people didn't necessarily know the proper injection methods. Different injection methods create different sizes of wounds, and I think the ones that drill large holes in the trunks tend to be more damaging to the tree, and those trees will they can live several years, but a lot of them have died, partly because maybe they weren't as healthy as they could have been. They weren't as selective about which trees they were treating. So most trees in the east have died, you know, if they weren't treated.
So does that clear the area out? I mean,
So-
are they actually eradicated from the area?
So no, yeah, right. They're not ever going to eradicate emerald ash borer. There's always going to be a few ash trees around that shows a little bit of resistance. There's, you know, still seed sources in the soil bank that are coming up. Even if the trees are treated, there's still some insects that will survive. But yeah, their populations will definitely go way down once most of the trees in an area are gone. And so then, and this is kind of the positive, is we may not have to treat every 2 years with a trunk injection. We might be able to get by treating every 3 years or every 4 years. Spread that treatment time out. That gives those trees more time to recover from the trunk injection. And, you know, maybe you'll have a more successful treatment. So Yeah.
Are there any trees that have escaped it back there, or,
Ye-
or naturally
Yeah.
water resistant that might be propagated?
Yeah, that's a good point. They have found some trees that, what they call them, lingering ash. Lingering ash. These are trees that all the other ash trees have died from emerald ash borer, but here's this lingering ash, still growing, still fine. They think that there is potentially some genetic resistance in these trees, and there is research going on to look at these trees more closely, propagate them, see if we can come up with some, resistant American ash species that are naturally resistant. Now, there are little tiny parasitic wasps that provide natural control of emerald ash borer. They actually lay their eggs on the larvae in the wood, or they lay their eggs on the other emerald ash borer eggs, and that helps. But they don't work really well. Where they're going to work probably most effectively is once we get most of the ash trees are gone and the populations of emerald ash borer have crashed, and then these tiny little parasitic wasps will be able to help keep that population down and help not have to treat as often. Okay, it's all very complicated. There's no easy answer. It's very hard to know what's the best thing to do. So those are.
Well, what did I hear you say over here a minute ago in your breath, what the city's doing with, her part?
Well, we're taking the stance that, the trees, a lot of the trees are already strapped. So there's not really a tree that's a good candidate for an injection. So we're gonna take a position at that, because by the time we spend the money to do that, and what Maury had said, they'll eventually die. So we're gonna be spending that money to do that, and then turn around and spend the money to build it, so.
So my 10-foot around tree, I just as well get on the list for next December and January. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's what I'm hearing too.
Yeah, yeah. I probably would be thinking about when it might go on the list. The next, again, like I said, probably for the next couple of years, we're not gonna see very much mortality. But it will eventually.
People are in the trees, this community. They're overworked anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, so you'll have to get on a list and a waiting list.
Maybe 6 months.
But those, like the park trees, see, they don't get extra water, they don't get a lot of, careful treatment. They are fighting, in the drought conditions. So of course your park trees are gonna be very stressed. And they're not gonna be quite as healthy. So that makes sense to not try to,
Yeah, and then
Do
I've
treatments on
been
those.
accused of planting too many trees in the parks too. So now with those trees gone, we'll have trees.
Now,
already,
yeah.
so.
Yeah.
You didn't plant enough of them.
Yeah.
Well, and Memorial, where it was founded, Memorial Park has a lot of great trees. I mean, lots of diversity in there. And you can go there. Some of the trees, I think at least some of the newer ones, they're putting signs on them so you can kind of see what does this tree look like? Hey, I kind of like this tree. I don't know, Cody Park, does that have a lot of, yeah. So that's a nice way to go and look at potential trees that you might want to plant. Just go out to some of the parks here and see what's out there, what's doing well, what you like,
I
Think about
remember
that.
when I planted my ash trees 35, 40 years ago, we must have planted 5 or 6 different kinds of trees, and the only thing that grew were my ash.
Were the ash.
That succeeded.
Yeah. Ash they're a tough tree. They were nice looking trees. They grew well, and yeah, so everybody planted them.
When you said that chemical, does it dissipate or does it change a chemical character? So it's not effective.
The chemicals that are used, whether soil or trunk injection, they are probably gonna be broken down over time in the trees. Or in the soil, you know, if there's some residue in the soil, you know, that, it does get broken down. Different chemicals break down at different rates, you know, some of the more, concerning chemicals are slower to break down in the soil, so you hear about, you know, not using some of these chemicals, but yeah, these are just gonna break down.
When the adults, come to the ash tree, where do they like lay their eggs? Is it up high or?
Yeah, the adults will, so when the adults come out, the adults will be coming out generally starting about in May. Okay, May, June is when a lot of them come out. They'll come out of the wood through the little D-shaped holes, and they will tend to lay eggs. They'll feed on foliage, you know, and they'll lay eggs all over on the bark, generally on, you know, branches, you know, an inch or two in diameter all the way up to the trunk, right? But the larvae that hatch from those eggs are going to be most successful starting at the top of the tree. The ones down that are trying to feed in the trunk are probably going to mostly die because the tree is much more vigorous in the trunk. Up here, as you know, small branches are being eaten by these insects, they're going to start killing that branch back. So a lot of the activity starts high in the tree, and then it slowly starts to die back more and more. Then you start to see more activity down here. But those adult beetles are laying eggs all over the tree, all over the trunk, on the bark. So, yep.
Okay, are these chemicals harmful to humans? I mean, application wise?
Yeah.
Protective clothing or?
Right. Yeah.
gloves?
Yep. You should be, you know, wearing your, you know, protective gloves and long sleeves and whatnot when you're applying these chemicals, which is, you know, typical for any of these pesticides.
Well, you see people walking around with Walmart Roundup, no gloves, and
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
sure that it's not very potent, but it's still there.
Yeah.
You know, it can be a carcinogenic part of
Yeah.
it. So,
Yeah.
just kind of makes you
Ye-
wonder.
Yeah. And I know that it's hot and you don't want to put long sleeves on and you don't want to put on long pants, but you know, that's good to protect yourself. Those chemicals.
So if you pick a tree that you think is a good candidate to treat, does that give you an advantage that you're treating your tree as opposed to maybe your neighbors that are not treating theirs?
I guess I'm not understanding your question.
Okay, so say you have a good candidate to treat,
Okay.
and you've been treating it with the soil treatment for
Okay.
years. Is that gonna give you an advantage to people that are not treating their
Right,
trees?
yeah, because your tree, has the chemical that's gonna be killing any attacking insects, while the neighbor's tree that isn't treated, the insects are gonna be able to, you know.
So it does give you an advantage.
So yeah,
doing the soil treatment.
so yeah, you are going to keep your tree alive longer than your neighbors probably will, so. Yeah, and you can go, man, I've got an ash tree, you don't. But, you know, it's, everybody's gonna be different,
Yeah.
so.
Well, you said you have about 700 ash trees in inventory roughly?
The 700 ash trees are considered park and street trees throughout the
Yes,
North Platte.
they're city owned basically, so.
But they're not city owned.
Okay.
They're on city right of ways, but they're actually responsibility of the
So
homeowner.
Okay, that's a good point, yeah,
homeowner still
so,
has responsibility to take care of it.
yeah,
That's correct.
so those trees in that right of way is the responsibility of the owner. And so they can decide if they wanna cut it down, or they
Right.
can decide if they wanna treat. Okay. Okay. I would encourage you, there's these brochures that are on the table in the back. Like I said, selecting trees for emerald ash borer treatments, we'll have lots of pictures. Ash tree identification, just in case your neighbor doesn't know what kind of tree they have, you can show them that. And then there's two that are similar, decline in ash trees, borers and bark beetles. So this has all those little borer holes that I mentioned earlier. And decline in ash trees, diseases and environmental stresses. So just because you see a tree that looks bad doesn't mean it's got emerald ash borer. There's a lot of other things that are stressing our trees. But the fact that we now know that emerald ash borer is here in North Platte, very likely many of the ash trees do have at least some level of infestation. Especially those near Memorial Park. There may be other infestations that we don't know about, but now is the time to learn about it and decide what you might want to do. So. All right. I wish I could give you better news, but hopefully that'll help you make some decisions.
I'm just curious, in eastern Nebraska or even Iowa, where it's been for a while, are those, some of those communities, or maybe a lot of them, at that exponential
Yes.
stage?
Yes.
Where it's just exploding?
Yeah.
Like in Nebraska?
Yeah.
Would you say?
Well, and the first place it was discovered in Nebraska was Omaha. And Omaha's been very good. They have been, at least the city, has been working hard to remove trees and try to get ahead of that expansion of mortality. But there's a lot of private ash trees still. And we're starting to see quite a bit of mortality now. And that was in 2016.
Now starting to pop up pretty good.
Lincoln, yep, Lincoln
I
is,
heard like have 92,000
yeah.
dead ash trees now.
92,000.
Really? Okay, I hadn't heard the number, but,
I've heard, yeah.
okay, I don't know. But, yeah, I mean, you can look around Lincoln and you're seeing
Right.
dead trees. So, yeah, it's starting to, and Lincoln was, I can't remember what year we found it in Lincoln, but yeah, we're getting into that exponential phase as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah. This is historical times, you know, this is like the Dutch elm disease. It's as big a thing as Dutch elm disease, so.
Well, for what it's worth, I've got a good friend that lives north of Hershey. He has an American elm that's real healthy.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
keep
They're
an eye on that survived on the ash tree.
yeah.
I wish
Well,
some of you had more fun.
and
Really.
my street has has islands, and there's one big American ash tree, American elm tree in the island, and it survived. So, yeah, there are survivors out there. So,
And they're propagating.
yeah, what's that?
I mean, they're propagating.
They're working, yeah, they've been working on that for a long time, for resistance. And hopefully someday we'll have some resistant ash that will be able to distribute.
You give me hope. I planted an ash tree that the neighbor down the street had pulled out of his yard and laid out on the street and ready to take away, and laid there for 3 days. And I talked my husband into helping me drag it home, and it was about that big around. And I planted it, and it's grown.
And it's growing,
And so maybe I better leave it, and it'll
Yeah.
be the one that.
Yeah, that's-
Yeah.
I didn't have any money to buy the tree.
And I'd say, you know, for people that have, you know, maybe large properties, and you've got an ash tree way back there, you know, that it's not gonna fall on a house, it's not gonna, you know, you could leave it there, and, you know, even if it does die, I mean, this is a wildlife tree. You're gonna attract lots of woodpeckers, you know, and, I mean, so you can kind of look at it in that way, as long as you're not creating a hazard situation with your dead tree. You know, rural properties that have ash trees, you know, out there, not a big deal. So, well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate coming out here and all the questions you had.
All I'm not being here for your introduction.
Yeah, we kind of were,
Got kind of
yeah,
distracted. They thought they had to have something going on live.
right, yeah, well, that's the way it works, so.
Lori and I have been together quite a while. I mean, we've known each other, gone through many conferences and meetings and workshops and all that kind of stuff. And she's always known her stuff, so I've always appreciated her coming out and doing this.
It's fun. Actually, I haven't talked about emerald ash borer for a few years, so it was, and so it's like, yeah, I'd like to come out and.
Yeah, I know. There's been some conversations that, you know,
Yeah.
we need to talk about EAB again.
Yeah.
And so it's
There
new,
was-
it's new to us
Yeah.
out here. And that's why we started doing this, because people, you know, trying to not even able to identify what they're, if they have an ash tree or not, to what's gonna happen. And so we're at the point right now where nothing's really happening except for one here, one there, but when it starts hitting,
Yeah.
then people are, it's gonna be a wake up call. And we wanna be in front of that a little bit, be a little more proactive rather than reactive. So this is why we're doing this now, especially in the middle of April when you have a chance to treat.
Hate to, how late do you think you should not treat in the year? Like, you know,
Yeah,
some people won't think
right,
about it till May or even June,
yeah.
but at what point is it kind of too late
First,
to get up
I'd
in there?
say, you know, the soil treatments, you know, you could probably do some in May and you might get some, you know, protection that way. Excuse me, but probably much beyond that, you're kind of missing the main, you know, feeding period. The chemicals just gonna get picked up slowly and not get distributed very well. Trunk injections, again, earlier is better. But you can still get a little bit of control as you go, you know, later into the summer. The more concern is making sure that you're not applying chemicals when it's really hot, when the trees don't pick up moisture very well, so they're not gonna pick up chemical very well. They could even be burned a little bit by some of the chemicals, so.
Usually when like right now, the ashes are buttered out pretty much, and in the next couple weeks, they're gonna be folding. So that's a time when they're really working full stuff out of the ground. So now's a good time to do it.
Yep.
Well, there's some samples of what
Yeah,
ash
what they look like.
and washboard does. I even brought some branches in that we pulled out of the tree in Memorial Park.
Oh, okay.
So I have
You have-
those. I have both, you know, the trails that were done and the D-shaped ones that come out of it. The branches too. And you'll notice that they're the smaller branches, they come out of the top of the tree.
Yeah.
So she said, you know, they like them smaller branches first. Because they,
Well, they're not big.
That's right, yeah.
small.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.